Morning team, it's me, your favourite, Jordan at Screen, and today I'm going to be revisiting yesterday's videos. I was hoping to put it off for a week, thinking of doing this whole feminism versus the patriarchy series, once a week sort of thing, but I figured I've got a script written, so I might as well go ahead and do it today because I can't be bothered doing anything else at the moment. So, let's get crack-a-lacking. Yesterday I spoke about feminism and the patriarchy and how feminists will never be able to defeat the patriarchy. I question the reliability of feminism and its definition of patriarchy theory, or the patriarchal model for social reality. And I discussed its inevitable failings. Inevitable being the key word, but today I wish to address its validity and will attempt to reconcile it, not with logic and rational thought, because, I don't want to pretend or make too obvious the fact that this is low-hanging fruit, but instead I'll assess it through the understanding of the feminist perspective, because why the fuck not? Nothing quite like stoking the Marxist flames of infighting, or group infighting, so that's one thing they certainly love doing. So, it appears that patriarchy isn't quite the hip thing with feminists anymore. They still whinge and whine and moan and harangue about it, but it's not quite the most correct model anymore, and actually it hasn't been for a while, since about the 80s or so. Now, it was only these past few years where I've really seen the feminists, or the gender neo-Marxists, really kicking into hyperdrive the new model that they're preaching, which is intersectionality. Anyone who's read anything from everyday feminism has probably seen the word floating around, or anybody who's paid any attention to Black Lives Matter or Feminism Plus or whatever the fuck they call themselves, you would have seen it. You might have also seen the word Kyriarchy, which is their official term for intersectionality, or the more technical term. There's a slight little difference between intersectionality and Kyriarchy, not much, but it's so minute that you might as well consider them one and the same. First coined in 1992 by Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza in her book But She Said, Feminist Practices of Biblical Interpretation, Kyriarchy describes a system of interlocking structures of domination. She uses the word to refer to the top-down power structures of domination and subordination effective in the social and political life, in the family and the state. She later expanded in this in her 2001 book, Wisdom Ways, Introducing Feminist Biblical Interpretation. Oh fuck, just dropped it. Where she says, Kyriarchy in classical antiquity was the rule of the lord, slave master, husband, elite freeborn, propertied, educated gentleman, to whom disenfranchised men and all woe/men were subordinated. In antiquity, Kyriarchy was institutionalized either as a monarchical or as a democratic political form of ruling. So as you can see, she's really narrowing it down to the demographic of men who were in control, who were the ruling class. Where she says, to whom disenfranchised men and all women were subordinated. Where she says disenfranchised men, do not let the terminology fool you. Hear disenfranchised men and think, wow, feminist theory has been teaching me that women had to fight for the right to vote, and I don't recall ever hearing men having to have to fight for the right to vote. They did, but nobody teaches that in schools. So you'd hear the term disenfranchised men, I think it's a minority, whereas in fact enfranchised men were the minority, and quite a slim minority they were. About 98% or so of men did not have the right to vote, and that's a very conservative estimate. But no, correct me if I'm wrong, that definition that she gave sounds almost kind of enlightened, because what it implies isn't necessarily it was men, per se, who were at the top as a demographic. It was the very elite, top of the stack men, which runs away from the idea of us being in a patriarchy, because patriarchy suggests male superiority and male supremacy, and men being in charge, and pure male domination for the benefit of men as a class. And, correct me if I'm wrong, but this somewhat enlightened, for a feminist, view of history sounds a whole lot more like class-based oppression than gender-based. In effect, serfdom, or whatever cool word you want to give it. The idea itself of Kyriarchy had actually been discussed before. Back in 1989, Kimberley Williams Crenshaw wrote, and this is a hell of a long title, Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black Feminist Critique of Anti-Discrimination Doctrine, Feminist Theory and Anti-Racist Politics. And that's where she coined the term intersectionality. While she did not use the term Kyriarchy, she described pretty much the same thing. In before intersectionalists jump in and say typical white bitch stealing from women of colour. That seems to be the thing nowadays. White feminism and whatever. I think I discussed that later in this video. Do I? Yeah, I do. So, before I ruin the ending of my video, let's carry on. I recently spoke about how feminism will never be able to defeat the patriarchy. Yes, I did. I did that yesterday, but this is what happens when you write your scripts so far apart and then film them together. Because feminists do not understand patriarchy, we don't live in a patriarchy, and by attempting to dismantle the patriarchy, feminism is in fact ruining the everyday lives of women. Another reason they do not understand it is because they've always worked off this assumption that men have held the power as a demographic, as a class, because gender is a class apparently, and women have not held power as a demographic or as a class, and that men have historically been above women and have exercised influence and control and subordination, or domination as I should really say, over these women. So whilst Schussler Fiorenza tried to incorporate the notion of patriarchy into a wider definition of Kyriarchy, arguing that Kyriarchy is not simply the domination of men over women and men, rather it is a complex pyramidal system of domination that works through the violence of economic exploitation and lived subordination. Again, we are referring back to economical and not gender-based oppression. Whoopsie-doo. The notion that patriarchy can be included in Kyriarchy here fails. It fails simply because the definition of patriarchy is definitive, finite. It is men ruling over women, or as some progressive, we use that term liberally, some progressive feminists like to say, a society that advantages and favours men and maleness over women and femaleness. The definitiveness and finiteness of patriarchy cannot exist in the more fluid and expansive world of Kyriarchy, because Kyriarchy's parameters allow for circumstances where a female is privileged over a male. This flies straight in the face of classical feminist teachings. So this leads feminism to a bit of a crossroads. They do like putting themselves in slight little pickles. Do they accept that women can enjoy privilege over men via class, race, sexuality, disability, etc., or they cannot, thus rendering such identities as irrelevant in the context of oppression and privilege? This has caused much heated debate and controversy. However, where I've observed the majority of said debate is not pertaining the inclusion of men as victims of oppression, but more of that in a moment, but instead I've observed the majority of the debate in the feminist camps where they've been arguing almost to the point of self-cannibalization. Self-cannibalization? That's clever. Whatever forms of cannibalization can you have aside from self-cannibalization? Anyway, irrespective, they've been arguing to the point over who in their groups are the most oppressed. The problem with Marxist teachings, or in this circumstance neo-Marxist teachings, is that the self-described proletariat always want to find new ways to assert their oppression, and in turn demand some form of reparations. This translates into white feminists becoming the new petty bourgeoisie. Whilst they are still oppressed by the bourgeoisie, they can still exert oppression or class-based oppression over the true proletariat. Whom it is that is the true proletariat is yet to be defined. They keep getting ever more ridiculous and ever more minuscule in their definitions of who is truly the most oppressed, adding more and more retarded labels. Thank you, camera, for restarting halfway through my sentence. But yes, as I was saying, hopefully it didn't get cut out, is that they get more and more finite, more and more minuscule in their definitions of who is truly oppressed. Anyway, white feminism is the idea that white women who identify as feminists are oppressing women of colour through their white privilege and are preventing women of colour from letting their voices be heard. White feminism is feminism that ignores intersectionality. Essentially, white feminists need to shut the fuck up. But this is where they have dug their own grave. Because if Kyriarchy or intersectionality is correct and women of colour are being oppressed by white women, then the antiquated feminist teachings that profess the existence of patriarchy need to be thrown out the window. We need to start again. Feminism is outdated. Their central school of thought, their overarching theme, their most popular and loudest complaint that men as a class are oppressors and women as a class, or as a demographic, or as a trait, or as an identity, are oppressed, has now been rendered inert. How can feminism exist and be valid if their reason for existence has been proven by themselves to be a sham? Kyriarchy, or intersectionality, it is the way. So, consider this a little thought experiment. A white female police officer tasers an unarmed black man right in the face. He has been non-violent and committed no crimes, broken no laws, and to add icing to the cake, is their own race relations officer. So, what do we do there? Oh, and to add insult to injury, the incident is filmed and then put online. So my question is, who is oppressing who? Was he oppressing her through virtue of his sex? Did his maleness oppress her and subjugate her because of her femaleness? According to patriarchy theory, his maleness automatically assumes he is favoured over her. Yet, because of Kyriarchy, he is oppressed because of his race. I wonder if he felt patriarchal, or in any form of patriarchal superiority, as he lay on the ground convulsing due to the 50,000 volts that was running through his face. I mention that because that is a real case. It happened, funny enough, in my home city. Blast in face. Not a fun video to watch. But did he exert patriarchal superiority over her? Did he enjoy male privilege as his face was being sent into a coma? I do not know. But whatever I do know is that patriarchy theory is as outdated and as irrelevant as feminism. There are those who recognise the death of patriarchy, arguing that patriarchy just isn't useful when we want to talk about how its proliferation is negatively impacting men and women alike. Kyriarchy, by contrast, accounts for the increasing numbers of men who are suffering from sexual performance anxiety or emotional disconnection with women. Kyriarchy helps us to recognise the interconnection of education, class and eating disorders such as anorexia and domestic violence and poverty, rather than encouraging us to indiscriminately blame men. I like that little quote. I don't like how the first example she goes for is sexual performance anxiety or emotional disconnection with women. But okay, I'm sure there are bigger and better issues to reference, but at least the sentiment is there. But just as soon as an enlightened perspective comes along, so too must these postmodernist, neo-Marxist pseudo-reactionaries. They jump on this anti-progressive, anti-genuine progressive, that is, bandwagon and come out with their little blog posts screaming to the hills about how much more they are truly oppressed and not men and not the people who they perceive to be oppressors. Sigh. And I'd like to add this little snippet from the response blog post. It, Kyriarchy, is not about passing the megaphone to men so they can be included in the oppression Olympics. I love it. I love life. So, in conclusion, by acknowledging and preaching Kyriarchy or intersectionality, feminists have unwittingly disproved their boogeyman, patriarchy. The feminist town is not big enough for the both of them, but if they wish to profess that patriarchy is still valid, then they have to concede that men are favoured over women and thus disregard the impact of other identities. Bearing in mind the example I gave a few paragraphs back, I must ask the feminists, and I will take answers in the comment section below. Does patriarchy exist, or has the last 100 years of feminist teaching been utter bunk? There's some food for thought, no doubt to say. I'm going to get some feminist harpies in the comment section screaming to the hills and jumping up and down on their soapbox, yelling, "Oh, this guy doesn't understand feminism. If maybe he understood feminism more, then he wouldn't be in this position." No, you can argue that all you like, but I did just quote a plethora of feminist academics and scholars, so take your fucking time. Anyway, that's all for this video. I will see you in the next one, I think, maybe. Well, I won't see you. You'll see me, because cameras only shoot one way. But until then, Pseudo Pep.